Stop everything. You won't believe your ears. This Filipino teen channels Elvis perfectly on AGT, leaving Simon Cowell completely speechless. The audience went wild, judges couldn't handle it, and history was made on that stage. Don't miss moments like this. Subscribe to Kindness Verse now for more jaw-dropping talent. The bright lights of the AGT stage shimmered, bouncing off the sleek, polished floor, illuminating the familiar judges' table where Simon Cowell, Sofia Vergara, Heidi Klum, and Howie Mandel sat, each with their own mix of curiosity, anticipation, and mild skepticism. The audience murmured in excitement, shuffling in their seats, capturing the usual buzz of pre-audition nerves that always filled the studio. It was another night of amazing talent, another chance for someone to make history, but no one had any idea that tonight, history would be rewritten. Backstage, a young Filipino contestant adjusted his jacket nervously. He was calm on the outside, almost serene, but inside, a storm of emotions swirled. There was excitement, yes, but also the weight of the moment. He had dreamed of this stage for years, of showing the world his voice, and tonight it would all come down to just a few minutes. He could hear the faint hum of the audience, the applause from previous performers still echoing through the walls, and he took a deep, steadying breath. The contestant peeked through the curtain and saw the familiar faces of the judges. Simon Cowell, always the critical eye, was casually leaning back in his chair, a hint of a frown etched across his forehead as he examined the next act. He looked as though he had already seen it all, and perhaps for a moment, the young singer wondered if he would even get a chance to impress. Sophia and Heidi were chatting lightly, how they always did before an act, friendly banter that masked their sharp judgment. Howie, on the other hand, was scanning the stage with wide-eyed excitement, ready to be amazed. The contestant adjusted the microphone stand, making sure it was exactly at the right height, then stepped back, letting the weight of the moment settle. There was a quiet confidence about him, a poise that belied his years. He smiled gently at the judges, offering a humble greeting. "Hello, my name is... and I'm here to sing Elvis Presley," he said softly, almost as if he were sharing a secret rather than announcing an audition to millions of viewers. The audience responded with polite applause, though some chuckled softly at the audacity. Elvis? On AGT? In 2026? Some people might have thought it was a gimmick, a nostalgic stunt. Simon's eyebrows raised ever so slightly, the first visible crack in his skeptical armor. "Elvis?" he asked, his tone neutral, laced with curiosity and a touch of doubt. "All right, let's see what you've got." There was a stillness in the studio as the contestant positioned himself, feet grounded, eyes closing briefly as he centered himself. The lights dimmed slightly, and the background music faded into silence. Every crew member, every camera operator, every spectator seemed to collectively hold their breath. The stage was quiet, almost reverent, as if sensing that something extraordinary was about to happen. He opened his mouth, and the first note flowed out. It was gentle at first, almost teasing, but it immediately carried the unmistakable timbre of Elvis Presley. The crowd leaned forward instinctively, sensing the uncanny accuracy, the sheer quality of the voice. It wasn't just a note, it was a perfect replication of the king of rock and roll, infused with emotion and a unique personal touch. The young singer's phrasing, his subtle vibrato, and the authentic growl in his voice made it clear he wasn't merely mimicking Elvis, he was channeling him. Simon Cowell's eyes widened ever so slightly. He leaned forward, instinctively drawn into the performance, unable to hide his intrigue. He had heard a lot of voices, judged countless auditions, but there was something in this young man's tone that stopped him cold. The precision, the power, the emotion. It was as if time had folded and Elvis himself had walked onto the stage. The contestant's confidence grew with each note. He moved naturally with the music, adopting the iconic Elvis posture without exaggeration, letting his presence command the stage. Every flick of his wrist, every subtle hip movement echoed the legendary performer's style, but without feeling forced or artificial. The audience, initially reserved, began to murmur, then gasp, and soon erupted into a spontaneous wave of applause and cheers. Their reaction reflected a mix of shock and delight. No one expected to witness something so flawless, so electrifying. The camera captured close-ups of the judges' reactions. Heidi Klum's jaw dropped slightly, her eyes sparkling with surprise. Sofia Vergara covered her mouth, leaning forward as if trying to process the unexpected brilliance unfolding before her. Howie Mandel could barely contain his excitement, clapping with unrestrained enthusiasm. And Simon sat frozen for a moment, absorbing the unexpected spectacle. His legendary critical eye, the one that rarely betrayed emotion, now betrayed something undeniable: astonishment. For a moment, the music and applause faded into the background, as the young Filipino singer fully immersed himself in the performance. Each note, each phrase was deliberate, yet effortless. There was a raw authenticity that connected with every person in the room. It wasn't just the technical perfection, it was the emotional power, the ability to make the audience feel, to make them relive an era of music they thought they would never experience again. As the first verse ended, the contestant paused briefly, letting the silence linger, letting the impact of that opening note settle in the air. He looked at the judges with a soft, humble smile, acknowledging their presence without arrogance. The audience erupted into applause, the sound swelling like a tidal wave through the studio. Simon's hand instinctively went to his mouth, trying to process the impossibility of what he had just heard. How could someone so young, so unassuming, command the stage with a voice that felt both legendary and alive? The stage lights shifted, highlighting the contestant as he prepared for the next part of the performance. There was no rush, no panic, only the calm, poised energy of someone who had trained for this moment all his life. The anticipation was palpable. Everyone in the room sensed that this was only the beginning, that something unforgettable was about to unfold. And in that quiet, expectant moment, the Filipino singer stood ready to unleash the full power of his voice, to take the audience, the judges, and the world on a journey through the soul of Elvis Presley. The room held its breath, waiting, because tonight, history was about to be made. The moment the first note escaped the young Filipino singer's lips, the AGT stage transformed. What had be? Polite curiosity and mild skepticism in the audience and judges now turned into a collective shock, a stunned silence that seemed to ripple across the studio. The note wasn't just accurate, it was uncanny, as if the king of rock and roll himself had risen from the past and was standing there in front of them. Every nuance, every vibrato, every subtle growl carried the authenticity of Elvis Presley, yet somehow bore the contestant Ace's own signature, a spark of youth and emotion that made it mesmerizing. The judges froze, each in their own disbelief. Simon Cowell, infamous for his brutally honest critiques, sat straight up, his eyes widening behind his trademark glasses. He leaned forward, gripping the table, as if bracing himself against the impossible. "Wait, what?" he murmured under his breath, caught somewhere between incredulity and awe. He had judged countless singers, countless impressions, but he had never heard anything like this. Heidi Klum's face mirrored a mix of shock and delight. Her hands flew to her mouth instinctively, as if the sound itself had rendered her speechless. "Oh my God," she whispered, unable to contain herself. Sofia Vergara clutched the edge of the table, her eyes wide and sparkling, leaning forward as though if she leaned any closer she could somehow touch the magic flowing from the contestant. Howie Mandel's grin stretched impossibly wide, and he started clapping before the first verse was even finished, caught up in the sheer energy of the moment. The contestant didn't flinch at all under the weight of their reactions. In fact, he seemed to feed off it. Each note he hit became bolder, richer, more commanding. He moved naturally across the stage, channeling Elvis not through imitation alone, but by inhabiting the spirit of the performance. His gestures were subtle but precise. A tilt of the head, a swing of the hip, a flick of the wrist. All perfectly timed to complement the music without feeling forced. It was the kind of authenticity that even the harshest critics rarely witness. The audience, initially polite, erupted into murmurs of disbelief, gasps, and cheers. Some clutched their chests, others covered their mouths, unable to process the brilliance unfolding before them. Cameras captured wide shots of jaws dropping, close-ups of hands flying to faces, and reactions that spanned the spectrum from stunned admiration to euphoric disbelief. It was a wave of human emotion, caught in real time, as if every single person in the room collectively realized they were witnessing something once in a lifetime. As the song progressed, the contestant's voice climbed through the familiar highs and lows of an Elvis classic. The sustained notes were flawless, ringing clear and true, while the growls and slides of his voice added grit and personality. Every shift in tone, every dramatic pause, was executed with a confidence far beyond his years. The judges couldn't stop watching, their eyes locked on him, their usual professional detachment stripped away. Even Simon, who had seen it all, seemed momentarily transported, leaning forward as if trying to memorize every detail of the performance, as though the sound itself demanded study. Then came the bridge of the song, the part where most performers falter, where nerves or technique betray even the most talented singers. But the Filipino contestant soared. His voice rose and fell with effortless precision, twisting and turning in a way that was both technically perfect and emotionally raw. It wasn't just singing, it was storytelling. The room was silent again, every ear tuned to the melody, every heart beating in sync with the rhythm. The audience hung on each word, each note, fully immersed in the magic. Simon's hands flew to his face as he tried to comprehend. All. How is this possible? He whispered to himself, shaking his head in disbelief. He exchanged glances with Heidi and Sophia, both equally stunned. Howie, ever the emotional one, had tears in his eyes, clapping uncontrollably. The contestant had achieved something rare. He had made history in real time, forcing even the toughest critics to admit, silently or out loud, that they had never heard anything like this. The song reached its climax, and the room seemed to vibrate with anticipation. The Filipino singer leaned into the final notes, his voice soaring higher and higher, each note sustained perfectly, ringing through the theater with clarity and power. The audience's excitement hit a fever pitch. Cheers, gasps, and shouts blended into a single wave of exhilaration. Some people stood up mid-performance, unable to contain themselves. Others were frozen, transfixed, almost afraid to blink. Then came the final note. It was long, powerful, and held with perfect control. The sound resonated through the theater, then hung in the air for a moment, suspended like a spell before fading. The audience exploded into deafening applause, a mixture of shock, awe, and pure joy. Judges stood, some clapping, some shouting, all utterly overwhelmed. Simon, usually measured and composed, was frozen for a beat, then slowly rose, clapping almost involuntarily, a look of absolute disbelief etched on his face. The contestant, exhausted but glowing with the thrill of the moment, smiled softly. He hadn't just sung a song. He had commanded the stage, held an entire audience in the palm of his hand, and brought Elvis Presley back to life with a voice that seemed impossible for someone so young. The judges couldn't stop staring. Simon, usually the toughest critic on television, shook his head in utter amazement. Heidi and Sophia were practically in tears. Howie was cheering uncontrollably, and the audience's applause seemed like it could shake the walls. For a brief moment, the studio felt suspended in time. The Filipino contestant had done something few could even dream of. He had captured the spirit of a legend while stamping his own identity on the performance. Everyone in the room knew they had witnessed something extraordinary, an audition that would be talked about for years to come. And even as the applause echoed, Simon Cowell muttered under his breath, still trying to process what he had just heard. I can't believe that voice." The final note hung in the air, resonating with a power and clarity that seemed almost unreal. For a heartbeat, the entire AGT studio was suspended in stunned silence. The Filipino contestant, still standing at the center of the stage, lowered the microphone slowly, his chest rising and falling with the exertion of giving everything he had. And then, as if a dam had burst, the audience erupted. Applause thundered through the theater, a mixture of shock, amazement, and pure, unfiltered joy. People leaped to their feet, cheering, clapping, some screaming in disbelief. The sound was deafening, reverberating off every wall of the studio, spilling out into the hearts of everyone watching live. Camera crews scrambled to capture every reaction, every expression of disbelief, every moment that could be immortalized for history. The energy was electric, almost tangible, as if the stage itself had absorbed the force of that extraordinary performance. The judges were no exception. Howie Mandel's excitement reached its peak. He was on his feet, clapping so hard it seemed like he might break something. Heidi Klum's hands flew to her face again, tears glistening in her eyes. Sofia Vergara leaned forward over the judges' table, laughing and crying simultaneously, unable to contain the mixture of elation and astonishment that said through her. And Simon Cowell, Simon, the notoriously unflappable critic, sat frozen for a moment, his mouth slightly agape, blinking as if trying to make sense of the impossible. He reached up to touch his face, as if confirming he wasn't dreaming. Simon finally rose slowly, still in disbelief. I have never heard anything like that in my life, he admitted, his voice almost breaking. That voice. It's unbelievable. The control, the power, the emotion. You are extraordinary. The words, though carefully measured, were filled with awe. He glanced at the other judges, who were equally lost for words, before turning back to the young singer, still at the center of the stage. The Filipino contestant smiled humbly, bowing slightly. Despite the deafening applause and the overwhelming reactions, he maintained a calm poise, almost as if he had expected nothing less than this reaction from himself. He had worked years to perfect his craft, to channel not just the technical aspects of Elvis Presley's voice, but the soul, the spirit, and the emotion behind it. And now, all that hard work had culminated in this breathtaking, unforgettable moment. The audience's chants grew louder, encore, encore, encore. They wanted more, but this wasn't just a performance. They wanted to witness history. Every person in the theater understood the significance of what they had just seen. Cameras panned over the crowd, capturing faces of astonishment, tears, hands clapping, people standing on chairs, unable to contain their excitement. Some whispered to their neighbors, "Did you hear that? That's Elvis!" Others were already taking out their phones, recording and sharing, knowing that this was a moment the world needed to see. Simon Cowell's hand hovered over the golden buzzer. For a brief, suspenseful moment, he just stared at it, as if he needed to process the performance one last time before acknowledging what it deserved. Then, with a smile slowly spreading across his face, a rare, genuine smile, he slammed the golden buzzer with authority. Confetti exploded from above, cascading in a sparkling storm over the contestant. The audience went wild, screaming and cheering even louder than before. Cameras captured every angle, the glittering confetti, the contestants' emotional reaction, the stunned yet delighted judges, and the overwhelming, uncontainable energy of the moment. The young singer's eyes welled up with tears, his face lighting up with an emotion that words could not capture. He had not just impressed Simon Cowell or the judges, he had touched the hearts of everyone in the theater, and millions more watching from home. It was a moment of pure triumph, of dreams realized, and of history being made live on stage. Heidi Klum rushed forward, embracing him briefly, while Sofia Vergara hugged him tightly, laughing and crying at the same time. Howie Mandel cheered, spinning in a circle, unable to contain his excitement, and Simon, after a few moments of silence, finally spoke again, still shaking his head in disbelief. That was one of the most incredible auditions I have ever seen. Truly, I am speechless." The audience continued to cheer, the noise swelling like a wave. Some stood with their hands over their hearts, some clapped so hard they were breathless, others were screaming in sheer delight. Every reaction was raw, authentic, a reflection of the deep impact the performance had left on every soul in the room. The contestant, overwhelmed but composed, waved humbly to the audience, acknowledging their energy and excitement, with a quiet, heartfelt smile. As the confetti settled and the applause began to taper, the camera lingered on the contestant's face. His eyes sparkled with tears, his smile radiated joy and gratitude. This was a life-changing moment, the culmination of years of hard work, and a turning point that would define the rest of his journey. For a young Filipino singer to step onto an international stage and deliver a performance that not only honored Elvis but transcended expectation was nothing short of monumental. Simon Cowell, finally regaining composure, turned to the judges and the audience. "This is what talent looks like," he said, his tone carrying the rare weight of absolute sincerity. "This is why we watch this show. This is why we believe in talent, in dreams, and in the impossible." His words were met with renewed applause and cheers, a moment of shared recognition that this audition was destined to become legendary. As the contestant exited the stage, confetti still falling around him, the camera followed his every step. Fans and audience members continued to cheer, some already reaching for their phones to capture this iconic moment. The judges remained standing, applauding long after the last note had faded, their reactions a mixture of disbelief, admiration, and pure respect. And in that moment, it was clear, this wasn't just an audition. It was a once-in-a-lifetime performance, a reminder of the power of music, the magic of a dream pursued relentlessly, and the ability of one voice to stop the world in its tracks. The Filipino singer had not just impressed Simon Cowell, he had left him, and the entire AGT universe, utterly speechless. And as the cameras zoomed out, capturing the grandeur of the stage, the glittering confetti, and the faces of awestruck judges and audience members, it was certain that this performance would live on in memory, replayed countless times, inspiring millions and reminding the world what it truly means to have an unforgettable voice.